One ordinary morning, everyone except our hero disappeared from Earth. He stands in front of the window, confused and waiting to see at least one person, at least one living creature. And suddenly, he saw a bright light from which a beautiful girl with large wings was visible behind her back. An angel appeared to him. Our hero was very surprised to see her. Angel Lita introduced herself to him. She said she came to the last person left on Earth. The boy did not understand what was happening. He was shocked by what he heard. Earth has already accumulated enough experience, so it should move to the next level. First of all, it is the distribution of energy that will be used by people. Therefore, everyone was sent to another dimension to learn how to control this energy. But Lita said with a smile that he would not be able to do it. Because those who could not get to another world and use the energy will have to cope with their own strength. This is how the usual life of our hero began. He was desperate and very angry, not knowing what to do next. The boy spent a lot of time alone, and finally humanity returned to Earth. And together with the people, they also returned. Monsters! Big and scary! All the people are scared and don't know where to run. And here appears our hero, who has been preparing for a long time to meet these monsters. He was wearing a mask and holding a spear in his hands. On the day when everything happened, Ilkan, as usual, went to his university, and then, already standing near it, he realized that there was not a single living soul there. The halls were empty, but it was strange that the students' belongings were on the tables and someone scattered them on the floor. Food was also prepared in the dining room. Full plates were on the tables, and the chairs were pushed back as if someone had just had breakfast here. There was dead silence in the corridor of the university. It was completely empty. Where did everyone go? Today only I came, Ilkan thought. But the day today is simply wonderful. The guy waited a long time for the bus at the bus stop, but it never came. Realizing that he had no choice, he decided to walk home. Ilkan thought, when I get home I need to go to bed. Maybe it's all a dream. On the way to his house, he did not meet a single person. There were no animals or birds. It was completely quiet. Entering his apartment, he said, "I'm at home." And there was silence in response. Then he looked for his mother, who was always at home at this time. But she was not there. And suddenly he looked at his watch and noticed something very strange. The guy was very surprised and did not understand what was happening, because the clock showed exactly the time at which he left the university. And the phone shows the same time as the wall clock. But how? Ilkan was very confused by all the events, and tried to connect everything together. But after thinking for a while, he seems to have understood what exactly happened. He realized that he walked home for about 2 hours, but the sun is in the same place where it was in the morning. Which means what? Does this mean that time just stopped? And why? And what exactly happened? Ilkan thought. There were so many thoughts in his head, but they seemed simply absurd to him. He stood by the window completely bewildered by what was happening. All the people disappeared, only he remained. But suddenly he hears a loud sound, then a bright light, and something appeared in front of him. At first he saw large snow-white wings, and then a slender girl with blonde hair and wings behind her back, who charmed him with her beauty. She told him that time on Earth had stopped, but not for him. The guy was very surprised, but after a few seconds he comes to himself and in a trembling voice asks her who she is. The girl happily answers him that she is exactly the one he thought of. Ilkan freezes for a while, tries to put all the puzzles together, and then a thought comes to his head, and he asks, "Are you a burglar?" This question made the girl very angry, and she answered him with a shout that she was not a burglar. How could such a thing happen to him? She thought. She indignantly asks him, didn't he really understand who she was? She has wings and is wearing a white dress? Doesn't that remind him of someone? The guy rested his chin and thought a little more, then asked, "Are you a cosplayer?" The girl was even more enraged by this question, and she answered him through her teeth that he had not guessed again. Then she proudly told him that she was an angel, and her name was Lita. The reason she came to him was to say that he was retarded. What? Backward? Ilkan asked. He was very angry to hear her name him. And then he began to remember that it all started in elementary school. How he was simply forgotten at the bus stop and went on an excursion without him. In middle school, they forgot him again and left without him. Even in high school, everything happened again. Also, he was not even invited to an event held for students at the university. These memories made Ilkan very sad. He did not understand why all this happened to him so many times, and everything happened again. "Everyone went to another world except you," Lita said happily. "Why am I the only one left again?" Ilkan asks with tears in his eyes. The girl continues to tell him that now the Earth is in great danger. A great catastrophe awaits her. And to begin with, she will explain what exactly will happen, and then she will tell about him. The Earth is moving to a new level because it has already gained the maximum amount of experience. For humanity, this means that energy is now available to them, Lita continues. Access to the Akashic records will also be opened, and people will be able to use this data. We call it status. The girl finishes her story and waits for what Ilhan will say. The boy listened to Lita with interest, a look of genuine surprise on his face, and after she finished speaking, he replied, "Quite a simple explanation." The girl standing with a pointer in her hand said, "Well, I'm a good teacher." She goes on to say that along with the energy will appear terrible monsters that cannot be defeated with ordinary weapons. But the idea that she is a cosplayer does not leave Ilkana. If we were to leave mankind in the state in which they were until today, the risk of complete destruction would be very great. God stopped time and sent everyone to another world, where people will have the opportunity and time to learn how to use energy. To be more precise, their bodies are in a safe place, and the avatars were sent to another dimension. Thanks to this, they can learn, so they will have basic skills to fight these monsters. Here Ilkan interrupts Lita and asks whether these monsters cannot be destroyed with firearms or explosions. Even a nuclear bomb will not be enough for them because they are made of high-rank energy, answered the girl. Well, isn't God merciful who organized training on such a scale? She asked. The guy asked in surprise. What about him now? He was forgotten on Earth. Already with anger in his eyes, he asks Lita again what to do now. How can he save himself? The girl replied that it was just a mistake. Ilkan shouted back to her, "Correct this mistake!" She laughed uncomfortably and said she couldn't do that because the portal had already closed and it wasn't an option at all. She was struck by Ilkan's secretiveness. Even God himself did not notice him. He is completely wild from what he heard and just screams at her. How can a higher creature be so stupid? In hysterics, the boy continues to beg to be taken to another world and taught to control energy. He just can't control himself. Tears are flowing from his eyes. But Lita tries to calm him down and says that God sympathizes with his problem and decided to give him a bonus. But Ilhan only wants one thing, that she teach him how to use energy. The guy has already completely exhausted all his strength. He has already become completely indifferent to what will happen next. Lita is still trying to support him and will now bring him something to eat. People will return to Earth in 10 years, said the girl. What will I do here alone all these 10 years? Ilkan thought. The girl offered him to conduct training in order to prepare him for the arrival of monsters. But he did not see the point in this because he believes that learning to manage energy is much more important. Let's make you strong physically, Lita happily reassures him. Ilkan was not at all delighted by these words. He tries again in desperation to persuade her to send him to the others, but it is simply impossible. This is how his lonely life on Earth began. He visited China, visited all the important places, visited France and was near the Eiffel Tower. And yes, 5 years have passed since the disappearance of people, during which time Ilkan traveled a lot. During this time, he developed a very clear regime. Ilkan trained a lot and for a long time. While others were improving their ability to use energy, they were undergoing various tests. They became stronger in order to resist monsters and various monsters. All that remains for Ilkan is to increase his physical strength. Lita watched him all this time and asked him if he was bored. She asked him, "How can you do the same thing for 5 years?" "As if I had a choice," answered the boy. He was already completely exhausted. You Ilhan had a good recovery and became much stronger. He has a strong stamina. It is usually difficult for people to focus on one activity, Lita thought with delight. I knew that you were an unusual person. It was clear from the fact that you were able to hide from God, said the girl. I didn't do it on purpose, the guy answered. She was in a great mood. Ilkan looked at her and thought that he was grateful to her for always visiting him. Also, she always prepares many dishes for him. When it's time to eat, the table is automatically covered with food. And to be honest, it's much tastier than Mom's cooking. Sorry, Mom. And the dishes automatically disappear. It's so convenient, thought the boy. Physical training is over. It's time to learn martial arts and develop your weapon skills, Ilkan said. Lita asked in surprise. How will he do it without a teacher? I will find lessons on the internet, said Ilkan. The electricity and the internet are working, so he decided to work on videos, which he had previously put off for later. Suddenly, Ilkan asked her how the internet can work at all now. Time just stopped. That's why it works, answered Lita with a sneer. The guy understood that she was hiding something and asked her one more time, and the girl only smiled in response. As many as 5 years have passed, the houses are empty waiting for their residents. You Ilhan has been training hard all this time. The angel was always by his side and helped him in everything. He learns new techniques and always gives his best. His skill and endurance are at a high level. Yet every day he hones them to perfection. Lida watches him perform the techniques, and at one point says that although he still has 5 years to prepare for the arrival of the monsters, he should pay more attention to the basic elements. He has been doing this for 4 years, the girl thought with delight, watching Ilkan. Do you want me to be your sparring partner? Lita asked joyfully. You will develop faster with an opponent. The boy was very surprised to hear this. Are you offering me to fight you? Ilkan asks in surprise. But Lita continues to persuade him with joy and excitement. Although she allowed him to take her as rivals, yet he cannot fight with his angel. But he immediately changed his mind and began to attack her so that she would also feel his pain and disappointment. For all the 9 years he spent in solitude, then everything was like in a fog. The girl was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. She was born to fight, so she easily won this battle. Got it now? Asked Lita. Don't worry and train with me. These injuries are a gift to you, she happily continued. But Ilkan was not delighted with such an idea. Then he was more cautious because he didn't know what else he could expect from her. And yet they started training together. That's how unexpectedly all 10 years flew by. She said that with this level of training, he could easily defeat a low-level monster because she had trained him well, and then he would be able to use energy. But Ilhan was not happy with her words. He got really screwed during their training. Lita was very pleased with his efforts, but warned that a lot would change after the disaster began, and now she was leaving him. He thanks her for her help and asks if they can see each other again. But everything depends on him, answered Lita. There is very little time left before the return of the people. Ilhan has put on his best suit and is waiting. Sweat is running down his face. He looks excited, but is actually very happy because he hasn't seen anyone for so long. Lita is already leaving him. He is a little sad about it, but he needs to return to his usual life. This time has come. People must return to Earth right now, so let's start the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He still stands motionless, but feels that something is wrong. Even more, Ilkan begins to suspect that something has gone wrong. Already flying away, Lita also decided to see how the people will return, but sees only one Ilkan from below. She was shocked by what she saw and couldn't understand why no one came back. The guy was standing alone in the middle of the stadium, and there was no one else. He is very angry and demands that she explain to him why no one has returned yet. It seems there was a mistake, said Lita, although she herself had no idea why it happened. Ilkan falls to the ground and screams hysterically that he hates her. And how much longer does he have to wait? He is very angry with his last strength and says that if you just have to wait, then he will do it. However, time passed, and 10, then 20, then 30 years passed. As many as 50 years have passed, and no one has returned to Earth. All this time, Ilhan did not lose heart, and practiced a lot. Having learned more and more new techniques, he had enough time to perfect everything. His body has become even more relief. He is strong in spirit, and feels that he is already sufficiently prepared for the arrival of monsters. You have become so strong, said Lita. But he does not respond to her words at all. Nevertheless, he replied that after 50 years he completely stopped following the time. Lita was surprised and did not understand what the matter was, but asked him what was wrong. All this time, Ilkan missed his mother very much, but he never told her about it. But now he said that he had simply forgotten what his mother looked like. She lowered her eyes and sadly replied that she was really very sorry for that. He asked Lita how much longer he has to wait. After all, he was already very exhausted from martial arts. Disaster can start at any moment, she said to Ilkan in fright. He can't stop training now. Lita fearfully asks him if he is in despair now. He stands looking into the distance, self-confident, and answers her that he knows that at such a high level, he only needs to read books. Her eyes sparkled from his answer, and she understood that he had not given up yet. Lita liked his answer, and they continued to enjoy the beautiful view together. Ilkan did not waste time. He read a lot, starting with modern literature, then books on business. Studied the basic sciences, history, geography, physics, chemistry, and art. He sat in the library day and night, read all the books that were there. The boy studied foreign languages and traveled a lot. They always traveled together. First, they visited neighboring China. Later, they were in Russia, then in America, and in all the countries that met on their way. He also learned several languages. He visited Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. He has read most of the books in the world. Several dozen years passed. Ilkan finished another book from the library. Lita told him that he had read the last book that was in the library. He reached out and asked her, what else should he do? She was surprised that he had the desire to do something else, and asked him if he wasn't tired. He joyfully answered her that there was no time to rest. He still had a lot to do before the disaster began. So many years have passed, but he still believes that humans will return to Earth and this was all a preparation for the disaster. Lita asks God to send people to Earth as soon as possible before Ilkan despairs and gives up. There is silence all around. The weather is simply beautiful. Suddenly a sound is heard and a big boar runs out of the bushes. That giant boar was easily hunted. Ilkan now decided to try himself in blacksmithing and leatherwork. He began by hunting a boar. He is quite strong and pulls this big boar by himself. It was quite easy for him, and he thinks that he will be able to skin the animal himself, so he chooses a suitable knife. He believes that if he kills all the animals, then the monsters will not appear. Lita doesn't like what Ilkan does at all. She asks him to hunt only those animals that she is allowed, and not to kill all animals, because the world balance may be disturbed. Suddenly she said that the monsters had already started to appear, but quickly fell silent. He heard what Lita said, and asked her to continue talking and not to annoy him. She, in turn, asked him to pretend he hadn't heard anything. But then he doesn't care about her words, and he just does his job as a butcher. Lita wonders how Ilkan can succeed in everything he starts. Years 274 have already passed. This is a lot even for an angel. She is surprised how someone who is given no more than 100 years can be engaged in preparation for the future for so long and with inspiration. Ilhan had just finished his work and was very glad that he had succeeded in everything. Lita said that he is an incredible person. Beautiful, calm sea. What will Ilhan do this time? His training continues, and this is already the final goal in the case of a butcher. This time he decided to deal with the whale. Learning about this, Lita was simply furious. She forbade him to touch the sperm whales because they are an endangered species. But Ilkan asked her to close her eyes to this. He jokingly asked to be called Ishmael, a reference to Moby Dick. But she did not like the joke. 300 years have passed. He thoroughly learned the trade of a tanner. He then decided to learn blacksmithing, but it took longer than he expected. When he read books on blacksmithing, it seemed easy to him, but in practice it is very difficult. Suddenly his hand slips, and oh, something happened. The sword he was making broke, which made him very angry. Ilkan thought that he was not handling it well, and that his hands were growing from the wrong place. At first his swords always broke, but he still did not leave this business. He spent 5 years creating a simple sword, but he did not like the result. Lita took the sword from his hands to evaluate it. She examined the sword and said with a smile that even a radish cannot be cut with this sword. Ilkan did not really like her words, and he sharply said that he did not ask her to cut something with it, and that she should give the sword to him. Lita joyfully told him that she would take his sword for herself. But he was not happy with these words. She said that God sent her to help him, so he should be grateful to her, and Ilkan shouted that she should not make him nervous. All the same, Lita took this sword for herself, and she was very glad about it. During this time, he tried to create all kinds of weapons that he could think of. In his arsenal, there were a wide variety of swords, of different shapes and different strengths. He created spears, axes, hammers, and many other weapons. Another 50 years passed like this. Ilkan continued to spend a lot of time in the forge. Every day he created more and more weapons and was not satisfied with that. He wanted to hone his skill to the perfect result. But finally, after wielding a hammer for hundreds of years, he managed to create something. For 100 years and hundreds of attempts, he managed to create a masterpiece. He created the perfect spear. Litu said that it was the best thing she had ever seen, and that she admired Ilhan's tenacity. She told him that when energy appeared, other materials would appear that would be stronger than steel, and he replied that he would simply make a new weapon. She stood behind him and was very happy to hear his words. He really will never give up, Lita thought with delight. After processing meat and blacksmithing, Ilkan again began to practice martial arts techniques. He trained a lot and just lost track of time. Lita watched him and did not understand how Ilkan could constantly improve. Doesn't he get bored of it? Years 1,000 have passed. She kept thinking that sooner or later he would reach his limit, and what would happen then? These thoughts did not leave her. Ilhan was in excellent physical shape. His body was perfect. She thought a lot about the fact that it would be good to find him some new occupation, something he had never done before. Here the thought comes to her mind that he has never had a relationship with the opposite sex. She is frightened, quickly drives such thoughts away. She herself did not understand how such thoughts could come to her head. She is an angel, and she cannot and should not think about such vulgarity. These thoughts enchanted her. Lita convinces herself that this is not her desire, this is her mission, and she just has to help him. And if he needs help, then she should do everything necessary to help him. Ilkan watches her and asks her what she is doing there. He loudly asks her what she is doing there. Lita came down to him and did not know where to start their conversation. She came very close to him, and they stood for a while, just looking into each other's eyes. He calls her by name, but she does not respond at all because she is thinking about how to start a conversation with him. After a while, she recovers and continues to look at him, covered in sweat, and suspects that he may have guessed everything. Suddenly, he notices that her sword lights up and starts to move. She looks at the sword in surprise and does not understand what it could mean. Her sword flies away from her, but they continue to watch it motionless. But Lita quickly begins to fly for the sword that she took from Ilkan. It was his first sword. He calls her with all his might, but she flew so far that she didn't hear him at all. Suddenly, he sees that something is beginning to happen to him. Ilkan realizes that he is now wearing the clothes in which he was dressed on the day when time stopped and all the people disappeared. The simulator he broke while practicing techniques returns to its original form. Hide everything around, begins to return to its original form. Lita nevertheless manages to catch up with the sword and quickly takes it in her hands, then continues to ask God not to take this sword from her. Immediately she glances at the ground and sees that something is happening there. She began to understand that what they had been preparing for 1,000 years had begun. Ilkan is being lifted higher and higher by some unknown force. He is flying in an unknown direction, and he cannot do anything about it. He is completely helpless here. Lita tries to hold the sword and shouts that she simply cannot believe what is happening. She mentally turns to God and asks him to let her at least say goodbye to Ilkan. Lita felt that she was holding the sword firmly in her hands and thanked God for leaving it to her. She hugs the sword to her heart and rejoices that it still remained with her. Tears came to her eyes. She had become so attached to Ilkan during this time. But will they ever be able to meet again? Suddenly she turns around and quickly flies back to the ground and shouts at the top of her voice that they didn't even kiss. So why weren't they given a chance to say goodbye? Ilkan looks at Lita and does not understand. Are they really going to part ways so easily without even saying goodbye? He watches her with sadness and thinks that everything happened very suddenly. And really they won't even be able to say goodbye. She is beautiful, she is an angel, a creature of the highest level. Ilkan ponders whether they can meet again if he reaches her level. The two of them are very upset that they did not have the opportunity to at least say goodbye. The city is still empty, but everything around looks as if those 1,000 years have not passed. Suddenly, some strange flickering begins to appear. From this flickering, human figures begin to be seen. In the university classroom, human figures are also visible. Everyone returns to their seats. Next, figures appear in the university cafeteria, and so everyone returns to where they were before the disappearance began. The university is increasingly filled with people. Everyone behaves as if nothing had happened. Ilhan is standing among the crowd, and his attention is drawn by one sensor tablet. This panel has his data, his status, his level, and the skills he has. He realizes that the status window means that a major disaster has begun. Ilkan observes other people, and they all have the same panels too. Only 10 years have passed for them. For all people, only 10 years have passed. Only for Ilkan everything lasted so long. The guys who were standing next to Ilkan suddenly saw that the indicators on their panels suddenly returned to their original characteristics. This happened to all the people who were near them. He heard that in order to raise the level of their characteristics, they worked hard. It was very strange to him that there were so many people around, but no one paid attention to him. He felt invisible, even amongst so many people. Ilkan thought that maybe he was being overlooked because of the stealth characteristic that was on the panel, and tried to remove it. All his attempts to get rid of this characteristic were in vain, and it made him very angry. Was he very upset by the thought that he would probably be alone all his life? Then, he became indifferent to everything and decided to return home. On the way home, Ilkan overheard a conversation between two men who were very happy to finally be back on Earth. He himself was very happy to see many people during such a long period of their absence. Finally, he can watch such a beautiful sunset. Ilkan will return home a little exhausted, but all his fatigue disappeared somewhere when he heard someone calling him. He was very surprised to hear this voice. Suddenly, he sees that his mother is standing in front of him. Ilkan has already managed to forget what she looks like, but he finally sees her in front of him. He missed her so much, and was very happy to see his mother in front of him. As soon as he saw her, all his memories immediately came alive. The mother he hadn't seen for 1,000 years finally came back to him. The beautiful sunset also returned, which Ilkan had not seen for a long time. He missed so much this smell in the apartment, his mother's delicious food. He missed his father, who usually read the newspaper at the table. Now everything is as it was before. His father was surprised that there was no news about Hazia, the place where he learned to control energy, in the newspaper. In Haisia? Mother asked father. Here she was in Yamen, together with their neighbors. After hearing his parents' conversation, Ilkan realized that something had changed in them. He was so happy to see his parents that he listened with delight to what they were saying. His father joked that Haija was perfect, but he didn't find rice there, and his mother said that she never managed to learn how to control energy. And suddenly Mom looks at Ilkan and asks him where he was all this time. He decides not to tell his parents that he was forgotten on Earth, so that once again they do not worry. He smiled and said that it was a place without a name. His father thinks that controlling energy is really very difficult. My mother agreed with him and said that the young and strong should be taken for training, and not all in a row. The training lasted for 10 years. Ilkan added that they took everyone for training because it is forbidden to break the balance, although in his opinion it is still not very effective. The parents looked at him in surprise and did not understand what he meant. They asked him about what balance and what efficiency he was talking about, but Ilkan replied that he did not mean anything by this and decided not to say anything more so as not to arouse suspicion. And suddenly Mom asks, how was his education? His mother had heard that if you managed energy perfectly, you could make a lot of money selling monster bodies. Such people are rare, his father answers, but they can really get rich from it. Ilkan puts his chopsticks on the table and finally dares to tell his parents something important. They look at him and continue to listen to him attentively. He is very worried, but still gathers courage and says that he cannot use energy. The parents continue to look closely at Ilkan, and he could not understand how they would react to his words. His mother told him that there was nothing wrong with that, and he could just focus on studying at the university. Ilkan was glad that his parents accepted his words so easily, and he was happy that everything returned to its place. It was already dark in the yard. He returned to his room and saw something strange there. He saw something that struck him very hard. In the corner of the room, his spear stood. Ilkan thought that all his weapons disappeared as soon as the world became what it was before. He suggested that perhaps this spear remained with him, thanks to Lida. Ilkan was glad that the spear was now his, and he did not need to look for other weapons to fight the monsters. Suddenly a panel appeared in front of him again, this time on which were written the characteristics of his spear. Next, he decided that he needed more information about what was happening now. He read books from all over the world, and was so happy to see something new. There were a large number of posts with various information on the internet. After returning from another world, people immediately began to post all the information they received on the internet. First of all, they were looking for information on how to level up quickly, and how strong do you need to be to defeat a monster. It seems that an ordinary person can handle a level 5 monster. In another world, one had to level up to at least level 7 to become a low-ranked fighter. From level 10, you could get classes, archer, swordsman, and others. From level 50, strong fighters start who can get second class. Class 3. These are fighters who are already at level 100. From this moment, they become a national treasure. Due to the brutal conditions of obtaining the 3rd grade, no one was able to reach the 4th grade. Most people think that the 4th and 5th classes are the dragon or Bahamut levels. This is all that Ilkan was able to find out with the help of the internet. Then he decided to ask more students at the university. He had not been at the university for so long, but in his opinion, nothing much had changed there. In general, the whole everyday life has not changed at all, unlike the world in which it is now. Ilkan sat and remembered the moments when he and Lida traveled. He misses her, and thought that she would be glad to hear it. Suddenly he heard a loud noise, and did not understand where it came from. He quickly turns to the door and shouts, "Who is here?" Here, someone appears next to him, and tells him that she was sent to him by heaven to teach him how to use energy. Ilkan saw that someone was standing on the windowsill of his window. She introduces herself to him. Her name is Erta, and she is an angel. He was very surprised, and could not believe that this was happening to him again. "That is, an angel burst into my life again?" Ilhan asked. She told him that controlling energy is difficult, so God creates avatars to send them to another world for 10 years to study. He replied that he understood this, but an avatar was not created for him. That's why she came to him to help the one who fell behind. She said that someone asked her very much to help Ilkan, who was lagging behind. He stood silently in front of her and tried to understand who asked her to help him. Lida asked not to leave him to his own devices because he put a lot of effort into training, and also asked to send someone to him to teach him how to control energy as soon as possible. Ilkan was very grateful to Lida for the fact that she continued to take care of him. He asked Erta why Lida did not come herself. She told him that their leadership was worried about the close relationship between a high-level angel and a human, so they sent her to help. Ilkan was upset about this. He really wanted to see Lida. Seeing him, Erta did not agree with Lida's words because he was not at all helpless and did not look like someone who needed help. She looked at his panel with characteristics and only confirmed her guesses. With this level of physical training, he does not need the help of an angel at all. He can easily defeat a weak monster with his bare hands. Erta remembered again how tearfully Lita asked to help Ilkan, who had been lonely for 1,000 years. And he was the only one who did not know how to use energy. Lita was just pretending to be an innocent angel, she thought. She realized that this was Lita's cunning plan, but she had no choice because she had already been given this mission. Erta noticed that he trained his body well, now she will teach him how to manage energy. But Ilkan did not understand how she would manage to do it. She stomped her foot hard, and this made it clear that she was confident in her abilities. Erta told him that she is above the creature, so it is enough for her simply to be next to him. And from the fact that she is nearby, all indicators related to energy will increase 10 times faster. Ilkan spent 1,000 years with Lita, and even that did not change anything, because there was no energy before the disaster, and now, Erta calculated that 1 year would be enough for them to make up for everything. He angrily asked her, is she planning to sit on his head all this time? She said that she had a spell on her, so low-level creatures wouldn't be able to see her, and Ilkan replied that that wasn't the point at all. Was he worried about how he would take a shower if she was next to him? He believed that it violated his right to privacy. Even in the toilet, he will not be able to be alone. He didn't like her idea at all, but this was not the only problem for him. The big problem for him was that next to her, he would not be able to see 2 terabytes of his treasure. She absolutely calmly answered him that she was not interested in it at all. She doesn't care if he dances rumba or breakdance in front of her, or plays some obscure computer games. She made it clear that she was indifferent to how low-level beings entertained themselves. Ilkan did not believe her because he saw a smile on her face. They will spend the whole year together, so Erta asked him to put up with all the innovations. This is how his new life with an angel began. Today, for the first time in 1,000 years, Ilkan will go to study at his university. His routine everyday life begins, and Erta, of course, goes with him. Ilkan, however, could not stand it, and dissatisfiedly asks if she does not want to get off his head. Other people don't see her anyway, so she advises him not to pay attention to her either. But it is difficult for him not to pay attention to the fact that she is waving her legs in front of his eyes. He really didn't like the fact that she made fun of him. Suddenly someone touched his shoulder, and he saw soldiers passing by with weapons. The state prepares the army for the arrival of monsters. Soldiers with weapons control the situation everywhere. Ilkan is not sure if this will help neutralize the monsters. Lita told him earlier that only energy is effective against monsters. At the university, he feels invisible. Everyone talks to each other, but no one pays attention to him. He thinks that maybe no one is paying attention to him because of his stealth skill, and tries to remove it from his profile. Erta, watching him, does not understand why he should remove this skill because, in her opinion, it is not bad. But Ilkan does not agree with her at all. He believes that this is a skill for losers. Suddenly, he hears a conversation between 2 students. They were discussing which of them had acquired which skills during this time. He does not understand what those students are talking about, and asks, "Erti, what are they talking about?" She explains to Ilhan that they combine very little energy and a pitiful battle experience to get something that can be used against monsters. He really didn't like her saying so rudely that their experience was miserable. She continued that from her point of view, even if you combined the skills of all the people present, it was no match for the way he was disguising himself. That is why she thinks that his skill is not bad. Nevertheless, Ilkan did not like this skill because he considered himself lonely, even with people. He thought a little and realized that this has its advantages. With this skill, he can easily eavesdrop on other people's conversations. He caught fire with the thought that this is also a great opportunity to get important information for him. Suddenly, Ilkan hears someone's conversation again, and it interested him. They talked about a girl who was nicknamed the Empress. She studied at their university, but they knew very little about her. He thought they might be talking about one of the students who had shown her talents in another world. Next, Ilkan heard a conversation between students who said that they were wondering when the dungeons would open, and that with their level, they would not get there. After hearing that, he realized that there are dungeons that have restrictions. He immediately asked Erti what a dungeon is, to which she replied that it was a trap created by God. She goes on to say that from the beginning, God leaves food in the dungeon to lure the monsters there, and when enough of them gather there, he shuts them in from the middle. And unlike monsters, people can go in and out as needed. This place where people can hunt safely is called a dungeon. Ilkan wondered why not close all the monsters in the dungeon then. They can't get out of it anyway. Dungeons have a lifespan, that's why people have to clean them, answered Erta. She told him that there are also very clever monsters who will not fall into this trap. There are also monsters that can break these traps, and monsters that create their own traps. So it's best to be very careful. An older man, who is a professor, enters the classroom. The first thing he does is to check the attendance, and begins to give a long lecture, which does not suit his subject at all. He talks about how they have to adapt to a world that has changed a lot. Also now it is forbidden to use energy freely, and controls are put in place to raise levels. Ilkan was not at all interested in listening to this. He did not understand why the teacher did not teach them his subject. He thought about whether, in general, it is worth paying such a large amount of money for education, and whether it is worth continuing to study at the university. He believed that the use of energy would be more in demand now than some papers about graduation from the university. Erta told him that the best training was hunting monsters, and Ilhan sharply answered her that he did not want to do anything dangerous. She advises him to start training now because it is the early stages of the disaster and the monsters are still weak. In her opinion, while there is an opportunity, it is better to kill a lot of weak monsters, and due to this increase the level and energy. Ilkan does not agree with her because, at the moment, he is only at the first level and cannot use energy. And Erta convinces him that he has perfect physical training, and this will be enough for monsters that have not reached level 25. Ilkan was surprised when he heard that she praised his physical training. She paid attention to the fact that something was happening outside the window, and realized that something had begun. All the students heard a noise and a loud cry. Erta already knew that now Ilkan would have the opportunity to test his skills. All the students quickly ran to the window to see what was happening, and were very frightened by what they saw. Big, horrible insects were everywhere. With every second, they were getting closer to them. The monsters very quickly reached the window where they were standing. One of them was standing right in front of them. Eartha said that now the training is over and humanity will have to survive on its own. A strong panic began. The students did not know what to do now, where to run. They didn't understand what the government was doing, and why the army wasn't exterminating these monsters. One daredevil asked who would like to join together for hunting, and only one student agreed, who, as a result, died of fear on the spot. Frightened students, quickly pushing each other, began to run away from the audience. Ilkan, too, was afraid of these monsters, but he remained standing by the window and just watched as everyone ran away. He was in despair that they did not pay attention to him again, and left him standing alone. He immediately began to look for something that could serve him as a weapon. Erta was surprised that Ilkan was going to fight these monsters, but he was confident in his abilities, and those monsters seemed weak to him. She warned him that these monsters were different from normal animals. Their skin was much thicker, and they were stronger. Ilkan broke off the leg from the chair and took it as a weapon, Erta continued. She said that these monsters are below level 20, so they won't be a problem for him. He starts swinging his weapon, and wonders if a chair leg will really be useful in battle. Erta watches him carefully. She sees that he has a strong spirit and strong muscles, and concludes that he will have no problems with a monster up to level 25. Ilkan adds some details to his weapon, and expertly tests it, performing various techniques. She watched in amazement as he performed techniques and mastered weapons perfectly. Erta asked him how he managed to make a suitable weapon so quickly, and did he learn crafts? He told her that he had enough time to learn something. She remembered Lita's words that Ilkan is so cute and defenseless, he can't do anything, and he can't be left alone. Erta now sees the complete opposite. Erta continued to think about how he was able to reach such heights. Maybe this is the result of extreme training? Ilkan had already prepared a weapon for himself, but suddenly he asked her if his cloaking skill could work if he started attracting attention. She thought, and answered, that a mask would be enough for him to hide his identity. Big insects have already invaded the whole city. Suddenly, someone from above flies right at this big monster. With all his strength, he deals a fatal blow to the monster, and defeats it. A stat panel appears immediately in front of him, stating that he has defeated a level 13 monster, and has reached level 3 stamina, strength, and agility, and his energy level has also risen to level 2. Ilkan was very happy because he was finally able to raise his level. A level is a record system of the Akashic records, in which you can become stronger by defeating monsters. The one who took the enemy's life receives not only a record in the chronicles and experience, but also the future potential of the enemy. He was very happy that his energy, if only a little, still grew. He froze for a second, and Erta asked what happened to him. Did he really enjoy fighting monsters? Ilkan replied that she is right, and someday, and she will get from him. Huge, terrible insects with red eyes attack him from all sides. He remarked that he had never trained to fight a group of monsters before, and Erta told him to rely on his reflexes, and that would help him. Ilkan boldly runs to meet the monster, which is quickly moving straight towards him. He manages to simply cut this monster to pieces. Pieces of the monster are flying in different directions. He managed to defeat him. The readings on his panel immediately spiked, and he realized that this was exactly what Lita had been telling him. Erta continues to watch Ilkan. She is impressed by his skill, but tells him not to relax. The big monsters continue to attack, but he feels no fear of them at all. He boldly starts a battle with them to destroy them and raise his level even higher. He again manages to cut this large creature in half. Ilkan does not yet know that a terrible, cruel creature is targeting him from behind. The monster knocked him to the ground and comes closer and closer to Ilkan and aims at him with his trunk. The monster pressed Ilkan and almost pierced him with its trunk. She was surprised at how trained Ilkan was, that his body had become, not penetrating, for the proboscis of a huge mosquito. Ilkan should not be frightened by this. He was easily able to repel this monster as well. Erta continued to follow him and was very impressed with his physical training. She thought that he simply exceeded the limit of the human body. He continued to fight monsters and gained more and more experience, and raised his level even higher. The big monster approaches him again and starts attacking. The monster swings at him with a limb, but Ilkan did not even move from this, and quickly repelled the attack and defeated him. Eartha warns him that even more monsters are approaching him. He stands alone in the midst of these gigantic monsters, all of them aiming at him. But he does not lose heart. On the contrary, he gathers even more courage, and confidently sets out to exterminate beetles. He flies up and starts killing monsters one by one, and from this he gets even more experience points. Suddenly strong lightnings appear in front of him. Ilkan does not understand what is happening and where they are coming from. In the distance, he sees a girl with big shiny eyes who skillfully releases lightning from her hands, and begins to help him. Ilkan was distracted for a second and thought, "Who is she? A magician?" Eartha immediately shouted at him to kill the monsters faster. The girl confidently fought monsters with the help of energy. Eartha was surprised that that girl could use energy continuously. Ilkan answered her that maybe she was just able to raise her level, just like him. His strength was at an end, but he was able to defeat the last monster and reach level 7. All the students watched Ilhan and were amazed at his strength and skill with which he was able to defeat all the monsters. He felt exhausted after the fight and was very glad that it was over. After the battle, a company of soldiers with weapons ran up to him, and they were amazed by what they saw. The soldiers were told that hundreds of insect-like monsters had appeared, and now they saw them dead and scattered around. Ilkan calmly tries to find the Stone of 4 Souls in the bodies of already dead monsters. Eartha begins to tell him that there is an energy stone inside the monsters, and that it is in the hardest part of the skeleton, that is where the energy is stored. But Ilkan already knew this. He deftly divides the monster and reaches the maximum level in this. The soldiers are watching Ilkan in shock, trying to understand what level he is at. The girl who helped him is also watching him with interest. Finally, he managed to get the Stone of Energy. Eartha told him that it was the basic material for all subjects. Suddenly, he hears that something is happening around him. Ilkan turns his head and sees that a large number of people have gathered around him. Everyone is watching him and filming on their phones. He did not know how to react to this, because he had never been paid attention to. Erta reassured him and told him not to worry, because he is now wearing a mask and no one will recognize him. Suddenly, a girl who helped him deal with monsters approaches him. She asked Ilhan if he could help her with processing the monsters. This was his first meeting with the Empress. He was surprised at her request, and in response asked how much of this he would get. She offered first 30, and then as much as 40%. After that, Ilhan agreed to help her. There were many people around who were following them. The girl stood in front of the dead monsters, and Ilkan began to process them. People excitedly looked at what they would do next, and filmed all this on their phones. They were able to see the Empress for the first time, and they were delighted with it. Ilkan thought about whether this is the same girl he heard so much about. She is really strong, he thought. Suddenly he heard the conversation of people who were interested in who he was. They said that rays shot from his palms, that he fought with a lightsaber. This surprised him very much, because all this was not there. Erta asked him if stealth is still a good skill. He had enough of a mask so that no one would recognize him. Ilkan felt sad after her words. He still continued to process the monsters, and found many energy stones. The Empress was very happy to receive energy stones from Ilkan, and sincerely thanked him for them. When he finished with everything and decided to leave, soldiers came out to meet him and asked him to stop. One soldier came even closer and aggressively said that he had to ask him something. Suddenly, this soldier is struck by lightning and his body bursts into flames. The Empress decided to shoot him with her lightning. Ilkan and the soldiers were shocked. The people watching them were also surprised. Their opinions about the Empress were divided. Some said how cool she was, some didn't understand why she did it. And still others just stood there silently in shock. Ilkan decided to get away before even more chaos started. But Erta calmed him down and said that he had nothing to worry about. As soon as they left a little, Ilkan still saw them, but people already started talking among themselves. Where did the guy in the mask go? He waved at people and shouted that he was still here, but no one had seen him. People continued to discuss how cool the guy in the mask was and how much talent there was in their university. Ilkan was very upset that he again became invisible to everyone. But Erta reassured him again and reminded him that she told him not to worry about being recognized.
Ilkan fell to his knees. He did not understand what was happening to him, as if everything went so well, but inside he felt broken.
A quiet, calm evening. The streets are empty. All the people are already in their apartments. Ilkan sits and thinks about what he can do with those energy stones that he got from the bodies of monsters. Then he decides to make armor for his protection. He thinks that it will be difficult for him to make a complete set, so to begin with he needs to make protection for arms and legs. Erta believes that he cannot cope with these energy stones, and persuades him to wait for a real craftsman and ask him for help. But Ilkan is confident in his abilities, and with a smile answers her that he will do everything himself. Erta again remembered Lita and how she asked to help Ilkan. "Oh, Lita," she said. Ilkan heard this and said that he misses her too. Erta answered him that she missed her too, and she thought about how Lita could deceive her like that. She thought that he was in some sense like a cheater, because how could it be that he knew everything and could do it? After thinking deeply about his skill and everything, Erta asked him if he knew anything about Manacraft. Ilkan heard about it for the first time, but he waited with admiration for her to tell him something more about it. She answered him with a smile that it was not surprising that he knew nothing about it. They didn't even have energy. He is excited. After her words, he begins to shake her and ask her to teach him this new skill. Erta screams at him to let her go, and she will teach him this skill. He quickly let her go. He was very uncomfortable after his actions. But she was still very angry with him. She was very excited that he touched her, because she was not used to him at all. She quickly pulled herself together and began to tell about the fact that energy crystals are used in crafting mana. These crystals are similar to energy stones, with the help of which they create weapons and armor that have a special power. This craft emerged from blacksmithing. After hearing that, Ilkan can't control himself again, and with all his strength he starts shaking Erta and asking her to teach him this craft. She, in response, gives him a strong slap to bring him to his senses, and says that she will teach him, and it is not necessary to shake her like that. After the slap, he calms down, and Erta in her voice reminds herself not to forget to say a few kind words to Lita when she returns to heaven. Ilkan did not understand what she wanted to tell Lita. Erta thought of telling her to take care of her husband by herself, and was very angry with Lita, but she didn't tell him that. Then she continued to tell him that before starting to craft armor, they need to prepare all the materials and magical stones or energy crystals with special properties. Ilkan was surprised by her words, and asked what properties the crystals should have. She explained to him that it was something similar to a stone called Dragon Heart. He immediately imagined this stone, and a big red dragon next to it, and said that it was very cool, and he liked it. Erta continued to tell that the magic stone should be placed next to you, synchronized with it, and after that, start the forging process. And only after the product is ready, it is necessary to grind the stone and apply it to the surface of the product. Already, after applying the magic stone to the surface of the product, a basic shape is obtained. And this is the end of the work, said Erta. Basic form can increase the characteristics of the product, add attack and defense power. Ilkan was very surprised because it seemed very simple to him. She told him that the basic form only enhances the characteristics of the product. But there is another craft, she added. A craft that can give new skills is called an advanced form. Make an advanced form is much more difficult. And with the amount of energy that Ilkan has, it is simply impossible to do it now. Even though he can't do it at the moment, Ilkan still asked her to tell him exactly how to make an advanced form. Erta told him that in order to add abilities to the product, the craftsman needs to put energy into the magic stone. But if the energy that he will transmit quickly runs out, then he will not succeed. If Ilhan manages to properly invest energy into the magic stone, he will be able to create the weapon of his dreams. The weapon will be able to throw fire and ice, as well as restore stamina when repelling an attack. She continued that when choosing an ability, the will of the master, the amount of his energy, and the number of magic stones are important. Ilkan was very interested in her words, and he decided to try to make a weapon with his own hands. He begins to make weapons. Eartha observes his actions and is impressed by how dexterous his hands are. He quickly manages to make protection for his hands and feet and was pleased with the result. Eartha was surprised that Ilkan managed to make protection for hands and feet, even without skills. Then he gradually began to concentrate energy. She thought he really had talent because he grasped the concept very quickly and immediately put things into practice. If he will understand so quickly, and everything that follows, then he will be able to get incredible strength. These thoughts did not leave her. The protective armor was already ready, so Ilhan began to think about how to use the magic stone for it now. He takes the magic stone in his hands and begins to synchronize with it. Eartha tells him to use the stone and his energy. Next, she begins to understand that he is trying to immediately make an advanced form, despite the fact that he does not know how to use energy. And if he does everything wrong, it will be useless. Ilkan does not stop. He concentrates all his energy on the process, and silently continues to synchronize with the magic stone. Suddenly a thick smoke appeared in front of them, and they saw some unusual weapon that looked like a praying mantis scythe. Ilkan, still trying to concentrate his energy even more, and synchronize with the magic stone that he pulled out of the body of the giant praying mantis. Eartha observes his efforts and understands that at this stage he cannot fail. She decides to help him, and adds a little of her energy so that Ilkan succeeds in everything. Finally, their efforts gave results. The stone from the particles gathered into one big magical stone, and began to shine brightly. He was very surprised to see how brightly the stone in his hand lit up. Ilkan, surprised, watched everything that was happening. The stone grew brighter every second, and the force of energy swirled around it. He saw a light in the distance. Something unknown was approaching him. Armlets that looked like part of the body of a praying mantis approached him. Eartha watched Ilkan's actions silently and with astonishment. She did not understand whether it was a failure or whether he succeeded. He smiled and immediately understood that he had succeeded in everything from the very first time. He was pleased with himself, and as soon as the bracelets were on his hands, a panel appeared in front of him again, on which it was written that he had reached the second level of mana craft. Ilkan immediately decided to test his bracelets on the chain that hung next to him, and from the first time, without even making much effort, he managed to break that chain. He looked at these perfect bracelets, which could serve not only as protection, but also as a weapon. And he realized that this is exactly what he wanted. Eartha watched him in amazement. She was simply stunned by the fact that all his efforts were to add the skill of the praying mantis in the bracelet. Ilkan was satisfied that he was able to break the chain with ease, but tells Eartha that now they need to hurry. She begins to tell him that she helped him a little with the energy, but was still surprised that he managed to create such an item the first time. He quickly begins to move away from her, and she does not understand what is happening. Ilkan starts to run very fast, and shouts to her that she needs to run away because he broke the swing. Eartha yells at him to stop. She will use restorative magic and everything will return to its place. And at this time, there is urgent news on TV that the authorities continue to search for unknown citizens who destroyed the monsters and disappeared. Ilkan was just going to study at the university, and he heard the news, in which they said that 2 unknown people from his university quickly destroyed monsters and disappeared without a trace. His mother heard this news and fearfully asks him to stay at home today. Eartha continues to listen to the news. The authorities called these people who disappeared users of super-powerful abilities, and believe that their level of mastery of energy is also very high. Mother excitedly continues to persuade him to stay at home. Ilhan saw the mother's profile panel, which says that she can now track her son's movements while he is at home. He laughed hysterically after what he saw, because now he will not be able to do anything calmly in his room. But still he reassured his mother, and told her not to worry. If he saw a monster, he would quickly run away. The news continues to say that the government is planning to create a unit of energy users that will be led by people with superpowers. Ilkan's mother asks him to be very careful, and he and Eartha go to the university. The weather was beautiful. All the people were hurrying about their business, but the atmosphere was calm. Ilkan is glad that he managed to get out of the house, despite the fact that his mother asked him to stay. He cannot believe that his mother has such a skill, and why does she need it at all, and what good will it do? With a smile, she begins to tell him that even in a large group of penguins, a female penguin can easily hear the cry of her chick. This is a useful survival skill. He imagined this situation, how he begins to cry in a crowd of people, and suddenly his mother appears there. Eartha asked him what happened to him. He replied that it would hurt him a lot if his mother stopped paying attention to him as well. She then asks him what he thinks about the news he heard today. about a detachment of strong fighters that the government plans to organize. He told her that he did not want to work for the government, and he was not interested in it at all. For him, he and his family come first. They continue to go further, and he says that it is easier for someone to act on his own. Additional restrictions are of no use to him. It seemed as if someone was following them. Ilkan stops and sadly tells her that he would like to meet the Empress again. Erta, with disappointment, asks him if he really fell in love with her, but he replies that this is not the case at all. Because at the beginning of the disaster, he is not interested in anyone at all. He doesn't even have time to look at his treasures. After what she heard, Erta became worried and began to look at him suspiciously, but he told her not to invent nonsense. Ilkan was very angry and disappointed after her suspicions, but she continued to talk about the fact that there are cases when the libido drops after heavy, intense physical training. He just couldn't hold back his emotions anymore and loudly shouted at her that he is not impotent. He stood in the middle of the crowd and shouted loudly, but absolutely no one paid attention to him. Ilkan's tears flowed from anger, and Erta tells him that even if he shouts impotent in the middle of the street, no one will notice because of his abilities. He answers her that he knows why this happened, and she asks him why. Ilkan thinks that no one is interested in him now because he spent so much time with Lita. Erta looks at him with pity, and says that really after he admired angelic beauty for 1,000 years, he could lose interest in ordinary women. Impotent. He orders her not to repeat that word again. Now he is interested in how the Empress learned to control energy so skillfully. Ilkan has already raised his level enough, but he still does not know how to use energy, so the abilities of the Empress are very impressive to him. There is nothing surprising in this. That is why God sent people to another world for training, Erta explains to him. Ilkan was not delighted that she reminded him again that he had been forgotten, and remained alone in this world for 1,000 years. But she continued that she considered him truly unique, because he was able to destroy monsters with his bare hands. He really succeeds in everything, on the first try. Suddenly she felt something. Ilkan silently watched her and then asked what was wrong. Erta said that she felt the presence of monsters nearby, a pack of 70 wolves and wild dogs. The pack is led by a level 35 diamond wolf. Ilkan was shocked to hear this. He asked, "How is it possible? Level 35 and 70 monsters." Then he simply cannot control his emotions, and starts shouting at her. Earlier, she had told him that there would be no high-ranking monsters yet. She explains to him that she noticed something strange yesterday, and she doesn't know why so many level 10 monsters appeared on the second day after the disaster. He was very angry because she did not tell him anything and asked her why she did that, but she answered him that she simply did not want to share her experiences with a creature of a lower rank. Ilkan was very upset by her answer and told her that she really is very different from Lita. For him, Erta was like an arrogant rich woman, drawing a line between the higher and the lower. And Lita, sometimes she seemed like a fool, but kind, like an older sister. He often remembered the days he spent with Lita and missed that time very much. He missed her very much. Finally, she decided to confess that the Earth was not really okay, and he had to help her. Ilkan was very surprised to hear her words. He did not expect that everything was really so serious. She told him that they must be in great haste, and she would tell him all on the way. She is going to show him the way to those monsters that she felt. Erta begins to tell him that God teleported people because of the catastrophe that befell them to another world, where people were able to learn to use energy. All the animals stayed here. God thought that nothing would happen to them in 10 years. But, unfortunately, due to some inexplicable error, the movement of time on Earth was greatly altered, and 10 years in other worlds turned into 1,000 years on Earth. He continued to listen to her, and ran with all his might to the place where she felt the monsters. After her words, he began to remember all the time he spent on Earth. Ilkan really didn't even notice that so much time had passed, because Lita was always by his side. Finally, she realized where the monsters were, and began to pull his hair with all her might, guiding him towards them. He quickly ran towards the monsters, and with tears in his eyes, begged her not to pull his hair, because in the future, he might simply not be left. Even considering the catastrophe, she continued. Animals lived 1,000 years instead of the usual term, so change was inevitable. Therefore, now the monsters of the Earth are much stronger than the monsters that exist in other worlds. Ilkan stopped for a second, and after hearing that, he realized that now the Earth is doomed. That's why Earthy needs his help now. Finally, they were able to reach the place where the monsters were. He saw the first terrible, gigantic, bloodthirsty monster with red eyes. He quickly puts on his mask, and she tells him that while the heavens are trying to restore balance, they are the ones responsible for killing the monsters. The monsters also smelled a human scent and began to move very quickly closer and closer to Ilkan. He climbed a tall building to assess the situation and to better observe the monsters. He had a spear that was endowed with great power. He understood which of the monsters was the leader of the pack, assessed the weak points, and who could be struck first. Ilkan quickly jumps down with his spear towards these monsters and strikes the first blow. He immediately managed to strike the most powerful blow for them, which killed more than half of the monsters. They flew in different directions. Immediately after that, he was able to reach level 9, gained a lot of experience, and obtained the level 35 Brown Diamond Wolf record. Urta was in shock. She was shocked by how he jumped right into a pack of monsters without thinking and without warning. She continued to follow his fight and wondered if he was sometimes a masochist. Does he like the challenge that much? The monster continued to attack him with even greater force, but he immediately felt that someone was attacking him from behind. Ilkan managed to quickly turn around, and with the help of his spear, he managed to repel the attack. He was able to kill them, and received the 18th level Stray Dog record. He thought it was a really cool name, even though they were regular mongrels. After the battle, he stands with his spear in his hands, and decided to look around to see if there are more monsters near him. But that was not the end. A large number of monsters went to places where there were large crowds of people. People started running in different directions and asking for help. People try to use their energy to fight monsters, but unfortunately they fail. And some people simply do not have enough energy, and they cannot protect themselves. But Ilkan managed to sense that the monsters still remained, and he hurried to help the people. Without thinking for a moment, he rushed to the monsters to protect the people. Ilkan, leaping up with strength, strikes them with his powerful spear. And these blows were fatal for them.